Welcome to The Midpoint, conversations with the extraordinary people building the American innovation economy from the inside out. I'm Patrick McKenna, founder of One America Works. Welcome to The Midpoint. I'm Patrick McKenna, founder of One America Works and partner at Comeback Capital. Today, we are joined by Dietrich Stephan, general partner at Cyto Ventures and executive of many things, which we are going to unpack in this discussion. Welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation. We're live in person today in Pittsburgh. We met a couple years ago, but we really caught up maybe 2-3 months ago, and you gave me some of the updates you've been working on, and I was just blown away at the progress and the number of companies that you have started, spun up, and now actually are leading. So look forward to digging into that over the next 15 or 20 minutes. So really great to be here with you.
Likewise.
So you are a transplant to Pittsburgh. You moved here from San Francisco. Would you mind just starting us off with why did you move to Pittsburgh? What brought you here?
Yeah, sure. But just by way of personal introduction, because I think it's relevant to the exodus from San Francisco. So I'm a geneticist by training. Every human disease is genetic. I don't know if your listeners know that, but whether it's single gene rare diseases like muscular dystrophies, whether it's cancer, which are a genetic disease of a single cell, whether it's infectious disease, you're harboring an infectious genome that's replicating uncontrollably, or whether it's chronic disease, which are caused by genetic variants that are triggered by environmental ins. Every disease is genetic. And so if you could get insight into what genetic variant is causing what disease, suddenly you have a bullseye against which to develop new ways to diagnose the next person in the door, give them an answer, and empower them to find solutions, but also to develop targeted therapies against. So trained as part of the Human Genome Project at the National Institutes of Health, had a first career in sifting through the bodies of people with and without genetic diseases to find out what was systematically different and really causing those diseases. Moved out to San Francisco to build the infrastructure for the country to deliver that genetic information to patients and physicians. Didn't exist.
What time frame was that?
That was in the 05 to 012 timeframe. And then right about that time, had then sprouted out and built a portfolio of companies in the Bay Area and was interested in epicenters of innovation and where the innovation was happening that would promise healthcare solutions for the future. And so did an analysis, actually published this in the Harvard Business Review in 2012, and Pittsburgh, of all places, was in the top 3. We all know the story, Carnegie Mellon University, on par with MIT in terms of the scale and type of research that happens there. University of Pittsburgh in terms of life sciences, third in NIH funding now.
That is less reported. So understanding Pittsburgh's position in the life sciences and the R&D around what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's a little known fact, but if you think about NIH as the funder of basic research in the life sciences, University of Pittsburgh ranked third in terms of aggregate NIH funding across the entire country. And so you think about Hopkins, UCSF, Harvard, Pitt is third. Wow. And so it gives you some sense of the scale. And the University of Pittsburgh campus directly abuts the Carnegie Mellon University campus, much like you would get in Cambridge with Harvard and MIT.
It's kind of where we're sitting right now. We're kind of sitting in between the campuses here in Oakland.
Exactly. And so, on the heels of that analysis and that publication, I was looking at, the top 3, and Pittsburgh had absolutely no translation and commercialization infrastructure resident locally. And I saw that as a huge opportunity to go in and really try and do some good.
And so you did an analysis, you mapped where the research dollars were going, and Pittsburgh popped to the top of your list, and then you made the physical move.
I did.
So did you come out first working at Pitt as a professor, or what were you doing what actually brought you here?
Yeah, so I had come back to Pittsburgh to scout it out and gave a talk at the University of Pittsburgh around the notion of exporting the university's innovation and trading it for another revenue stream. Traditionally, as academic institutions make their money by charging tuition and getting research grants, and sometimes by philanthropy. But here, you could actually create licensing revenue, take equity, create wealthy scientists that would then give back to the university. If you look at UCSF, there's Genentech Hall, and that resonated with the university. And so they asked me and helped me to come back and set me up with an infrastructure here in Pittsburgh to begin to plant the seeds of a number of companies. And so that's how I came back.
Now, fast forwarding a little bit, you decided to change that model. You left the university and the academic environment, and you started more of an incubator. So can you talk a little bit about Cyto Ventures and like how this came about?
Sure, absolutely. So as we've talked about, there's wonderful innovation here between compute and life sciences, but really no resident capital, equity investment capital, no management talent, and no infrastructure in terms of wet lab facilities, which are necessary for building healthcare biotech companies. And so there was a time in which I was working with local stakeholders to build that infrastructure. And once that infrastructure existed, it was all about then just building the companies. And so at that point in time, we raised a fund, Seed A fund, and the model for that fund was an operator investor model. So we would actually find scientists with great innovation that promised healthcare solutions of the future, transformational ones, and we would actually found the company around them. Some of us would embed within the company and become operators around that entrepreneur because they're not sort of walking around the streets as they are in the Bay Area or Boston here. And then we would seed the companies. And with that running start, and we would then work to syndicate our investment with larger funds, generally outside of Pittsburgh.
Was there an area within biotech that was a bigger opportunity now? So there's always this question of like NIH funding. Okay, that's a big deal. But converting that into a business, is there a why now? Did something change, or was there a particular technology that popped up and you said, wow, this innovation is ready for commercialization?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very clearly the intersection of computational technologies and information technologies with life sciences. It's the fusion of that. And if you look at this portfolio of companies, that will be a common thread throughout. And so there's one company that's named Dietrichs, which has a deep learning platform at its core that can actually use generative AI to spit out compounds with predictable activity and safety profiles. And so that's trained on a large data set, and it works. And then it has more of a classic biotech company on top of it that will take those compounds, do all the preclinical development, tox work, and then drive those into the clinic. And the first of those compounds just came out of phase 2A, which means it's safe and it works. And on the basis of that, we hope to populate a pipeline behind that. And so that's just one example of the fusion that I'm talking about.
So this is happening, generative AI application in Dietrichs. How long ago were you starting with that?
So that was one of the first companies we did. So,
so you're saying that generative AI isn't just something that started in February of 2023?
I think you're right. Yes, it did not. It did not.
Yes. It's another example of the innovation and the leading edge of a place like Pittsburgh that is surrounded by Pitt and CMU and the talent. You have been working on the future for years before the public or in the current market knew about it. Now the businesses or the companies are kind of coming up, catching up with the innovation you've been building. Is that about right?
Absolutely accurate. And that's the benefit of being fully immersed in this innovation base that is inventing and is the bleeding edge, and then being able to look at that with some suspension of disbelief and make some assumptions. Everything has complexities associated, but if you then build it, will it be transformational? And so that's the work that the fund is doing.
Terrific. Can you give us an overview of how many companies, kind of the stages of them, and how much funding has been raised? It's quite impressive.
Well, there's a dozen companies in the portfolio right now. Again, all of them started at the formation stage around an entrepreneur. The aggregate invested capital in that dozen or so companies over the last 5 years is approaching $400 million. A small portion of that is from our small fund, but then we actively work to syndicate those across investors to add scale in subsequent financing rounds. And if you look across the portfolio, I mean, it's marked at 2+X 5 years into the fund life, and so we're pleased to date with the performance, especially for a first fund in an underserved geography. And a couple of these companies, they span the spectrum from very early stage all the way through positive clinical data, which is really for biotech where the big inflection points happen. That's where the unicorns start to pop. And so the first of these companies has now reached that stage, should have a drug on the market in the next 2 to 3 years.
Wow, so that's coming up. It's like the 10-year overnight success, very classic,
yeah.
Particularly with the life science journey. You really don't see the results till towards the end.
It's so different than tech, generally speaking. Right. I mean, biotech is a long build. There are huge ups and downs. As an investor, you need to know that and be prepared for that and really steel yourself against the valleys, which are very deep in most cases.
Nothing's unique about your model is you are taking the executive role. You're a CEO of at least two of them. Could you talk about, from the CEO perspective, building a life science-based business in Pittsburgh, and like just share with us what it's like to manage, recruit, do all the things now as an entrepreneur, kind of flip your hat from investor to operator?
Having run companies in San Francisco, I can directly compare. So I have that experience. And there is literally nothing different about running a company here in Pittsburgh from one in the Bay Area, for example. There's wonderful staff talent here, resident locally. Management talent, often you have to hire virtually. So in one of our companies, our CFO is in Manhattan, where they probably should be. Our chief people officer is in San Diego, so she channels the sunshine our way.
Okay.
Our SVP of BD is in Princeton, New Jersey. And, post-COVID, that all works seamlessly.
Right.
And then when you think about capital, all of our fundraisings have been virtual for the last 2+ years, period. I mean, literally no in-person investor meetings. Investors aren't even coming into the office anymore generally. So when we try and syndicate these deals, it's seamless as well to get investors on the coast. And we have great investors in this portfolio of companies. I mean, name brand investors such as Teal Capital, Founders Fund, Desheng Capital, Point 72. So they also don't have a bias that we're in Pittsburgh is the message there.
Has that changed? So you did start your career in Silicon Valley. I did as well. And there was a big bias against companies outside of the Valley. If you're so good, then you should move to the Valley.
Yeah.
It sounds like your experience more recently, that has changed.
It's a little hard for me to answer that with clear eyes because, there was a beginning in Silicon Valley where if you don't know what you're doing, it really does help that you have serious people around you. And oftentimes those investors can provide that support to young entrepreneurs. But once you know what you're doing and you become one of those serious people, I think there's more latitude. That being said, absolutely, the world has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think that has largely evaporated in terms of the mindset of an investor that they have to be able to drive to you in 15 minutes. I don't see that a lot anymore.
So what is it about doing what you've ginned up a dozen companies in Pittsburgh? Now, the cool thing is that you can have a distributed, like world-class team supporting the companies, but they are based here. You're based here. Why here? Like, why is Pittsburgh the place you feel like you're going to be the most successful? Like, what is it about this place that says this is where I want to do it?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a half step back and ask, well, why would you even want to do entrepreneurial endeavors or company starting activities? It's not for the sake of doing it. There has to be a purpose. And the purpose is to output products into the marketplace that fundamentally improve the lives of your customers. And in my segment of the marketplace, that's healthcare. And so what we're trying to do is source the most transformational, most exciting bones of healthcare products that could transform lives. And so if you look at where do you source that, we talked about this is one of 3 geographies. I think ultimately that will be boiled up and that will all also be virtual. I think there will be some virtuality to tapping into centers of innovation across the world, quite frankly, that's seamless. We're not living in that reality today. You still have to go touch and feel and meet entrepreneurs and so forth. But I believe Pittsburgh has an absolutely unique innovation base that's colliding in different ways than it is elsewhere in the country, and it's a greenfield. It's not picked over, it's not driven into nooks and crannies. It's at the surface, accessible, and that's quite exciting to me.
In some ways, as an outsider, you came to Pittsburgh and you started looking around and you see all this ripe fruit and you're just like, wow, look at this technology, this innovation, this talented person, and you've put together this portfolio based off of what was here. Also, you have a positive mindset, you have a track record of success, you know what good looks like, and that's unique.
I like to say that there's ripe fruit on the trees here, and some of it's falling to the ground and you can go pick it up, and some of it's beginning to rot because there's no one to pick it up. And it's in many ways just an absolute dream for an entrepreneur who does have the ability to look at things and say, wow, that's good, let's take that. When I first moved here, there was a phase 2 ready clinical asset that looked like it was curative for type 1 diabetes, that the inventing scientist literally ran at me and said, I've got this, please help me, because there was no other outlet for him. And that's the kind of dynamic that is so refreshing in a geography like this.
So what's the one thing that you can use help with? Like, you're raising lots of capital, you've got tons of talent, you're getting access, you have a dozen companies in the pipeline, a few of them are getting late. What's the thing that if you could like wave your magic wand that you could change for your portfolio to be even yet more successful?
Yeah, so we're working on this. I mean, it's really scaling the fund so that we can really deploy capital and continue to invest at scale. And the reason that that's critical is because while we're forming companies, we're seeding them, there's still a layer of activity that requires the fund to and the management of each company to go out and spend huge amounts of time fundraising. And so, not that that's ever really, ever different from a company perspective, but as a fund perspective, we're sucked into helping those companies syndicate their deals and being on pitch calls and so forth, and that's a lot of work. Easier
so
to write
it's
a
the typical
check.
access to large pools of capital.
Yeah.
This is a classic challenge for kind of the cities that are in the interior of the country. I see it a lot. So as we're wrapping up, you are thick in the life sciences, genetics. You gave us a good primer on how important it is. Every disease kind of ultimately gets back to our genetics. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a couple predictions of innovations either in your own portfolio or adjacent that you want to share that we should start looking forward to that are exciting and positive?
I think it's important to recognize that the human body is just a machine. Mm-hmm. I know we don't like to think of ourselves as just a machine, but we are. I mean, albeit the most complex machine that we'll probably ever encounter in the universe, and it didn't come with an owner's manual. And so I think we're now at the point in the evolution of our industry where we can use natural design, meaning we can understand the parts of the machine and we can refabricate them in almost exactly the same form that they existed and evolved over millennia, and then replace them in that way. And so one of the companies, Nubase, is doing exactly that. We're creating synthetic DNA that you can inject into a living organism, and it will home in onto the genome and engage just with a misbehaving gene and modulate its output to correct the cellular defect and the disease. And so I think natural design and mimicking nature. I mean, we're not smarter than nature. We're still learning how nature works. Now we need to pivot that and redirect it to fix defects.
This is in the theme of like customized medicine?
Yeah.
And so that's coming and that's real.
That's absolutely real.
It's right here.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. That is exciting, and it's being done in 3 places, but primarily we're talking about being done right here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And anything else you want to share with us while we have you?
Thank you for doing this work. I mean, it's really important to shine a light on what underserved geographies are doing and how much potential really exists outside of the traditional epicenters. It's the bulk of the innovation happens here. And if we can harness that and aim it in the right direction, it's going to transform our health and wellness and our economy moving forward.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I have a saying, so that there's talent everywhere. And we need all the creative talent that we have in the world, but we're talking about particularly in our country to solve the biggest problems facing us. And what you're doing here is a great example of what's possible. So thank you for all you're doing, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
To learn more about One America Works, visit our website at oneamericaworks.org.